BBC News with Sue Montgomery. The US State Department has said more than $100 million of aid to Niger has been suspended following the recent military coup. Earlier, the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, announced it would hold a summit in Nigeria on Thursday. Our Africa regional editor is Richard Hamilton.
It all implies that perhaps they played their cards a bit too early and they don't have any leverage anymore. And I think ECOWAS was taken by surprise, firstly by the coup in the first place, and then by the support within Niger. On Sunday night, we were talking about this massive turnout at the stadium of 30,000 people in support of the military, and they weren't being forced to do that. ECOWAS is deeply divided, and it's complicated by the fact that about 1 million Nigerian refugees are in Niger, and they're really ethnically the same. So Nigeria doesn't want to send in troops against their own kin. So it's all a bit of a mess.
Kenyan victims of the 1998 US Embassy bombing in Nairobi have renewed calls for compensation from Washington. On the 25th anniversary, several hundred people, including US officials, gathered for a remembrance ceremony at a memorial park in Nairobi. The bomb killed more than 200 people. At the ceremony, Martha Karua, a member of Kenya's opposition party, renewed the call for recompense.
For the survivors, it's a day to thank God that indeed you survived and lived to tell the tale. It is also a day to ask, has justice been done to the survivors and to the families of the departed? 25 years on, still waiting for compensation.
President Zelensky says Ukraine is well within its rights to respond in kind if Russia continues to dominate in the Black Sea, to block ports and to launch missiles. Russia, he said, had cut off Ukraine's territorial waters, disrupting sea transport and grain ships. Sasha Schlichter reports.
Ever since Russia pulled out of the Black Sea grain deal last month, it began methodically destroying facilities in Ukraine's southern ports. This is having an immediate impact on the poorer African countries reliant on Ukrainian grain. That would partly explain their willingness to turn up in Saudi Arabia over the weekend for talks which pointedly excluded Russia. Mr. Zelensky said Ukraine had to find a way to lift Russia's blockade, even if that involved sinking all its ships.
Ukraine says 2 Russian missile strikes on the eastern Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk have killed 5 people and wounded 18. President Zelensky said the missiles hit a residential building in the city in the Donetsk region. World News from the BBC. Appeal judges at a UN tribunal in The Hague have ordered the indefinite suspension of the trial of one of the main suspects in the Rwandan genocide. Felician Kabuga has dementia, and a lower court had ruled he should face a slimmed-down trial. He was captured in France in 2020. Britain has begun housing migrants and refugees on a controversial barge moored off the southern English coast. Some 15 men, accompanied by staff, walked up a gangway onto the Bibby Stockholm, which London hopes will eventually house 500 in shared bunk bed rooms. The Bulgarian parliament has changed the law on domestic violence following a series of protests. People in intimate relationships will now receive the same protection as married couples. The change was prompted after an 18-year-old woman was abused by a boyfriend. The Oscar-winning film director William Friedkin has died at the age of 87. He rose to prominence in the 1970s with the cult horror film The Exorcist. He was hailed for revitalising the horror genre. Terry Egan looks back at his life.
There was no more terrifying film in the early 1970s than the one with which that music, Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, came to be associated. It was the horror film The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin, who was part of the new Hollywood movement of exciting young directors such as Francis Ford Coppola. It earned Friedkin a notoriety beyond any he'd had so far. Brought up in Chicago, Friedkin began his career in television and with documentaries. After The Exorcist, the fortunes of his later work were equally overshadowed by the success of that film about an innocent young girl disturbingly manipulated by the devil.
BBC News.